Welcome to my comparison between the IFT-5 telemetry and the IFT-6 telemetry. There's chapter markers in the bottom if you want to skip to any specific interesting point. Otherwise, we'll be going through this and I'll be pointing out various things along the way. But first of all, everyone loves rocket launches, so let's watch the rocket launch.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, quick pause here. Elon Musk posted after the flight that the offshore divert was caused primarily by loss of comms to the tower. While we don't know for sure, speculation is it was damage to this antenna, which after the flight looked like this. Before the flight, it was vertical. Anyway, if that's the cause, the advantage of having a tower catch the booster, rather than landing legs, is that they can add as much shielding or reinforcement as they want without making the booster itself any heavier.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Booster Raptor.
Another quick pause. The next little bit of footage is looking down from both rockets. If you look at the landscape, you can see the rockets are spinning slowly. All rockets do this to even out any slight variations in thrust or airflow, just like how rifles make bullets spin to make them more stable.
Chamber pressure nominal.
Booster and ship, avionics, power, and telemetry nominal.
All right, we're just a little over a minute
maximum
into flight.
Dynamic pressure.
We're about 6 miles away, so all the sound's still hitting us here. Hearing good call-outs that power telemetry nominal, that's flying straight and true. We do see all 33 Raptor engines lit up on telemetry screens. At this point, we've passed through that point of maximum aerodynamic pressure, that max Q. Now, coming up in just a little over a minute from now is going to be hot staging. So we're going to see the 6 engines on the ship ignite while still attached to the booster. Just before that, we'll see all but 3 center engines on the booster shut down. In what we call MECO, it's most engines cut off instead of main engine. And so while we continue to watch it go up, a lot of our flight controllers looking at all the systems around the tower. Again, we have to send a manual command. Just about 30 seconds away from hot staging. And we heard the tower is go for catch.
Booster engine cutoff.
The return flag is set for true.
Ship engine startup. Stage separation.
All right, hot staging confirmed.
Booster
6 out of
boost back
6 lit on the ship. Booster boost back going. We heard that we are go for catch. Kate, Jesse, take the views. Hopefully I got a booster coming home real soon.
Wow, from our view here, Dan, great views of planet Earth behind that super heavy booster. Right now it is performing the Boostback Burn.
Nominal.
Good news there, telling us that the pressures inside the ship are good. That is the second stage or the upper portion of the vehicle. Follow along with the telemetry on the bottom of your screen.
I timed the boostback burns, and IFT-6 burned for 3 seconds less. During the burn, the boosters are flying horizontally back towards the tower. So a shorter burn would suggest that it's already aiming for the Gulf of Mexico rather than gaining enough speed to make it all the way back. The booster software is making health checks 10 times per second, and SpaceX operations probably sees this in near real time, but there's a delay before the divert gets announced along the net.
Or orbital flights, and what you're seeing on your screen is a view from Super Heavy as it's making its way back down to Earth.
Yeah, once again, we are attempting an offshore landing of the Super Heavy booster. So we have seen this before, and it is still very fun to watching it come down for a soft splashdown off the Gulf Coast of Texas. We can see it there re-entering. We saw earlier those grid fins. There are 4 hypersonic grid fins. Oh, we can see that the landing burn has begun on the Super Heavy booster.
And same pattern, 13 engines Relight, gone down to 3 just as we expected. And what an incredible view of Splashdown that we got today.
And just to compare apples to apples, here's a comparison with the previous splashdown. IFT-6 burns later and harder than IFT-4, though it helps that they have resolved the problem with IFT-4, where one of the engines didn't relight due to contamination in the LOX tank. For efficiency, you want to burn your fuel as late as possible. If you slow up too soon, then you have to continue to burn fuel to compensate for gravity as you fall the rest of the way down. After the splashdown of the booster on IFT-6, SpaceX switched to coverage of ship. Of course, there isn't a tower in the Gulf of Mexico to catch the booster, so, as expected, it toppled over, and other coverage showed a really cool view of the fireball from the remaining fuel. At this point, ship is on a parabolic trajectory to splash down west of Australia. If you look at the telemetry, the flight profile so far is exactly the same for the 2 flights. We haven't had an orbital Starship test yet, as they are still testing reentry burns, so an orbital flight is no earlier than IFT-8. SpaceX had a surprise for us on IFT-6. Not only are they testing the rockets in this flight, they're testing all the procedures up to the launch as well. In this test, they went through the FAA payload approval process, and they got approval for their first payload, a banana toy. They couldn't have deployed the banana in orbit even if they wanted to. If they released the banana, it would just float next to Starship and burn up on reentry. Notably, there hasn't been a cargo bay door test since IFT-5, and that test didn't go very well. The ship for IFT-7 does have a redesigned cargo door. As I was just finishing up this video, the plan for IFT-7 came out. They are going to test the new cargo bay door and release mock-ups of Starlink satellites. As a side note, I was a little disappointed they didn't use a real banana. However, it turns out bananas really don't change much visually in space. You just end up with a freeze-dried banana. The clouds you see in the cargo bay are residual vapors from the air that was inside the cargo bay at launch. So now we'll skip ahead around 20 minutes while Starship's momentum carries it around the globe at roughly the same speed since there's very little air resistance. There is still some atmospheric drag in low Earth orbit, but on this time scale, the precision of this on-screen telemetry isn't precise enough to notice it. Incidentally, there is a proposed use for Starship in suborbital flights. If there was a tower in Australia to catch the Starship, you could make it from New York to Sydney in about 2 hours. This seems like an awful expensive way to fly, though. If you run the estimated numbers for the number of passengers and the cost of a flight, it comes out to about $100,000 per seat. Then here we have the first successful relight of a Raptor engine in a microgravity environment. They were going to try this on an IFT-3, but the spacecraft was slowly rolling out of control, so the test was automatically canceled. There's a lot of engineering that goes into pressurizing the header tank, and all the rocket fuel tanks for that matter, to keep the fuel at the bottom of the rocket and not sloshing around. If you look at the speed carefully, even with the engine lit, ship is still accelerating due to gravity faster than the engine is decelerating it because it's already on the way down towards reentry. The burn just altered the splashdown location somewhat further west of Australia. For reentry, we'll start sinking by altitude instead of time, so that we can compare the heating because the flight profiles vary quite a bit. At 134 kilometers, IFT-5 is already in a tail-down configuration, and IFT-6 is still flying level. One caveat as we watch the ship descend into the atmosphere. SpaceX builds these starships quite a bit in advance. So based on the results of IFT-4, they removed all the tiles from IFT-5's ship and replaced them with upgraded tiles. Apparently, they decided it wasn't worth the money to replace all the tiles on IFT-6 as well. So IFT-6 is flying with the older model of tiles that were on IFT-4. These are all test missions, but ship on IFT-6 was basically a test platform for various heat shield improvements. Starship V2 was announced already back in April of 2024, about a month before IFT-3, with smaller front flaps placed further away from the heat shield because the front flaps were generating so much lift that the back flaps had to compensate by rotating in the opposite direction. And also, of course, the flaps were burning up at the joint with the ship. So IFT-6 was now the third flight that they had made with an obsolete design. As of the taping of this video, Starship V2 hasn't flown yet, but there are already plans for a Starship V3. Though all we really know about V3 at this point is that it'll be even taller and have a larger cargo capacity. And the plasma is already visible, but at this point IFT-5 isn't in daylight and IFT-6 is in darkness, so this may just be differences in the camera exposure. Since IFT-5 went tail down earlier, it's now significantly lower even though the speed is roughly the same. If we resync again at 100 kilometers altitude, IFT-6 is now in a tail down configuration and going somewhat faster. On IFT-6, they decided to brake somewhat later and harder. Reentry is a lot like pulling off a band-aid. You can do it slowly and there's less pain, but it's for a longer period of time, or you can pull it off quicker. That hurts more, but not for as long. The faster you descend on reentry, the sooner you get to the point where the heat shield can start dissipating heat faster than it's building it up again. However, you can't descend so fast that the heat shield can't withstand peak heating. As we go below 100 kilometers, IFT-6 continues to descend more quickly. At 80 kilometers, IFT-6 has now slowed down to the same speed as IFT-5, but it did that about 10 to 20 kilometers higher in the atmosphere, and now both ships are at the same speed and altitude, but IFT-6 is now in a more tail-down attitude. At 69 kilometers, it's the first time we have views of the forward flap, and the flight profiles are similar enough that we can go back to syncing by mission time. At this point, in this view, IFT-6 is now the one with sparks coming off the fin, but other than that, both fins look fine. Also, notice that IFT-6 is continuing to descend more steeply, though at roughly the same airspeed. The joint is looking fine at this point, unlike IFT-5, but there's that red-hot triangle. Remember that Starship re-enters the atmosphere tail first, so the red is actually on the trailing end of the flap. On IFT-6, they plan for a more aggressive flip maneuver, and you can see it if you watch the orientation of the spacecraft on the telemetry. I'll resync IFT-5 at about 30 kilometers for a better comparison. IFT-6 continues lower and slower, and the tail starts pitching upwards. They both level out at about 15 kilometers and then glide down in the belly flop maneuver, still flying tail first. Passing through 3 kilometers, the tail on IFT-6 pitches up again. Then for the flip maneuver, the tail pitches down and around further past vertical on IFT-6 as the engines light for the landing burn. And then after an hour or more, and halfway around the world, the two ships splash down about 15 seconds apart in mission time. If you liked this video, please do all the things that make the YouTube algorithm happy. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.